I hope you're all right and in reasonable spirits despite the current situation. I don't know about you, but I feel a bit flat that this afternoon we're not going to be able to meet together as normal. I rather like and enjoy my Friday afternoons with Year 10. The joys of Ezzy asking lots of different questions, half of them not related to the lesson, Ashik with his humour, and Phoebe with her excellent smile, beavering away at the front. Anyway, everybody, let's see what we can do and make the most of this opportunity. So, before I start, I just want to put out an SOS for Aryan Bashir. Aryan is the only member of the class that hasn't managed yet to join Edmodo. I don't know where he is or if he's okay, if he's in trouble, but if you know of Aryan or any of his whereabouts, could you perhaps notify him about the situation that's happening in Britain at the moment and the need for him to join our Edmodo group and catch up with the work. Aryan, we look forward to welcoming you soon. So, you have found out about atonement, and I'm just very quickly going to go over that idea with you, all right, from the PowerPoint you would have seen last time. So it's an idea that is rooted in Jewish thinking and the Old Testament, okay? And the idea was that humans, Jews, could restore their relationship with God and be forgiven for the sins they've committed by sacrificing animal. So in the temple, literally the floor would have been flowing with blood of animals sacrificed in thanks to God and praise to God, so their sins would be forgiven. All right, this is how Jews thought, and how other cultures have thought in terms of their relationship with God or gods as well. That somehow a sacrificed animal restores the relationship with God and removes sin. So when the early Christians were trying to make sense of Jesus' death, because really they were not sure why he had died, there was no clear understanding of that. As that thinking developed in the early kind of Christian history, because most of the Christians, early followers of Jesus, were Jews in the sense, they used these ideas. Okay, so this would explain why we have this Christian teaching of Jesus' death being somehow kind of an atonement. It comes from these Jewish roots. Okay, so humans are sinful. We know about original sin now, and that sin separates them from God. It's something that separates humans from God. God very much wants us to restore that relationship. There needs to be some kind of atonement, making it one. And what the early Christians thought was that perhaps Jesus' life and his death on the cross in particular was the means by which God restored that relationship. Note it was from God really, not from humans. Okay, so this is why Jesus' death is seen as a kind of saving event, atonement. It's very alien to our kind of thinking in Britain, but it goes back to this first century Jewish thinking. Okay, so literally, you know, this is how Jesus' death is seen. That Jesus' death has now replaced the animal sacrifices. They don't need to happen anymore. Jesus' single death has restored our relationship with God through his own sacrifice. Okay, and so, you know, we go back to this little picture. Here we have sin, okay, separating humans from God, and then Jesus' death on the cross, which is kind of initiated by God. It's almost God sending himself to kind of restore that relationship and achieve some kind of reconciliation between us. All right, it's not achieved by us, it's achieved by God, and it's a gift from God. I'll say about that in a moment. Okay, so salvation then means to be delivered from sin primarily. All right, that's what it means, but it also means about therefore then being brought into heaven with God. All right, so you came across two ideas: salvation through law and salvation through grace. Now, salvation through law again has its roots in the Old Testament. You can actually save yourself by doing good works, by being moral, being ethical, all right, whether it's following the law, the Torah, or in Christians' case, following the ethics of Jesus. That somehow by your own actions you could earn sort of salvation from sin, cleansing from sin, and heaven. However, the predominant idea in Christianity is that you are saved through grace, all right, that actually because of our sin, our original sin, we don't deserve to be saved. neither actually can we do it, because we have a tendency to sin. Because of our original sin, we are incapable of really saving ourselves. So therefore, many Christians see salvation as a gift from God for everyone. All right, God has initiated the salvation himself by sacrificing his own son on the cross. There needs to be because of the sin, there has to be some kind of price paid. All right, that's how justice works. There has to be something. If you do something wrong, there has to be some kind of penalty paid, some sort of sanction. This is the sanction, but God does it himself. God takes upon it himself this death on the cross, and this is kind of offered to all of us. All that we as humans have to do is accept this sacrifice for ourselves. We have to have faith in Jesus. That's salvation through grace. Okay, this is then leads to that evangelical idea about committing yourself to Jesus, sort of the idea of an altar call kind of thing, and commitment to Christianity. All right. Okay, so that's just a quick resume of last time. Now we're on to the crucifixion today, which is very well known. Okay, and really I want us to just look at the brief details of that and how it has an impact on Christians today. That's the crucial question. Okay, so we talked a little bit about crucifixion. So in terms of your notes, you may have left some space in your book for these notes. Do it there. If you haven't left a space, don't worry. Do it after the work you did on Tuesday. So this is in all four Gospels. The story is accounted. It's very detailed. I think the crucial point is that what we see on the cross is Jesus as fully human. All right, we have this idea of the incarnation. Jesus is fully God, but also fully human. But on the cross, this is where we see Jesus as fully human. Okay, Jesus suffers. He experiences terrible suffering. All right, we talked about how you die by asphyxiation. All right, and it's brutal. This is what Jesus suffers. Okay. Now, of course, it raises interesting questions. Of course, if Jesus is fully God, then doesn't he have the knowledge of God? Doesn't he have an omniscience? Doesn't he know that he's going to be resurrected in 3 days' time? So actually, is he really suffering? If he knows that, he's not. When we're suffering, we don't know the outcome. All right, it's different. And there's been different ways of trying to resolve that problem. Perhaps talking about maybe Jesus' divine awareness, his awareness of being sort of God, is buried deep in his consciousness and not present at that time. But anyway, that's a side issue. But I think it's an interesting question if we take the incarnation literally. All right. But on the cross, we certainly see Jesus suffering. Okay, and it's interesting. At the point of crucifixion, if we look here. It says here, Jesus called out with a loud voice, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." When he had said this, he breathed his last. And in Matthew's gospel, actually, we have the Aramaic, which is the language Jesus would have used. Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani. That is, my God, why have you forsaken me? We really get a sense of Jesus here feeling abandoned by God. Jesus is human, all right, and he feels that abandonment, that suffering, that separation from God that many people do go through when they are suffering, perhaps times like these. Okay, so what I'd like you to do in your notes is just jot down some basic details about the crucifixion using your textbook. All right, just some key ideas like the fact he's crucified between two people. And he has a conversation with these that actually. At the end of the story in Mark's version, the Roman centurion says at the end, surely this man was the Son of God, almost as if actually they've admitted they've got this wrong. Now that could have been written in later, of course. There's a deliberate idea going on here that the gospel writer is trying to convey to his readers this was the Son of God. So some of this language here, some of the words are perhaps being edited and put into the mouths of people to get across a certain message. All right. So just some key details on the crucifixion in the book. And then crucially, I want us to think about how the crucifixion influences the lives of Christians today, because that's the sort of question you'll get in the exam. So I'm going to go through these points here. You can jot these down in your own time. You can pause the video and put these into your book, okay? You probably have your ideas, and obviously if we're in a lesson, I'd be asking you for those now, but I'll just take you through them. So I think first of all, Jesus' sacrifice on the cross gives hope to Christians, okay, because they feel that actually their sins have been forgiven through Jesus' atonement, so they feel a sense of hope that actually they will have heaven, they will be able to go to heaven, and they feel enormous gratitude towards God for this. That's the first thing. So I put those in red because that's the kind of the impact in terms of attitude. All right. We talked about how that can be an impact in terms of action or attitude. Secondly, I think Christians understand that believe that God understands human suffering because Jesus experienced it. That's a key idea in Christianity. Because they believe that Jesus was God, God went through suffering. So God knows what it's like to suffer. And this too can give Christians strength and hope in times of difficulty. Again, at times like these when we're facing uncertainty, anxiety, those worries about what might happen to us. All right, that for some Christians will be playing a part at the moment. I think it also reminds Christians that they must, and this is where we talk about action, they must follow Jesus and show compassion to others like he did on the cross by Jesus giving up his own life for others. So Christians are called to do that. Think about Martin Luther King and his campaign. There's a readiness sometimes to be able to sacrifice, a willingness to sacrifice your own life. And then finally, Christians accept that suffering is part of life, just as it was part of Jesus' life. There's an element of truth with Buddhism here, that suffering is part of life, and we can't get away from that. Okay, so there's 4 kind of ways that crucifixion can have an influence on Christians today. All right, so then moving quickly onto the resurrection and ascension, I want to just talk a little bit about this. So this is on the next page of your textbooks. Now there are 4 accounts of this in the Gospels, and they each have differences to each other, but there is a core similarity. And I think I like this picture because it kind of, for me, if you look closely, the people visiting the tomb, in a sense, this is a modern painting, are women. And I think that's a crucial thing about this story, is that the first people really to see Jesus in the stories are women, which would have been controversial at the time, and in terms because women were not always seen as trustworthy witnesses. So the fact that Gospels all have the women seeing this, suggests some kind of element of truth to the original version of the story. So again, just a few details about the resurrection. The women are going on early on Sunday morning. It's been the Shabbat, so they've had to bury Jesus quickly because of the Shabbat. They can't work. And now the end of Shabbat has come, and they're going to anoint the body and prepare it for proper burial. So they're going to the tomb, and they find, of course, the tomb is not there. I always remember when I was at church at Easter, we would go and this one chap who was the lay reader would always say, and they would say, "Where have they taken my Lord?" And I always remember his voice with that association, this story, that where is Jesus? He's gone, and Mary is confused, she's worried, and then of course the person she's speaking to speaks. She thinks it's the gardener, and when she hears his voice, she suddenly realizes this is Jesus. Okay, so there is also in the story 2 men, or sometimes 1 man, who seem to perhaps be angels, who are saying, "Look, Jesus is risen. He's risen from the dead. He's gone, and go and spread this news." And then we find in the account of the Gospels that Jesus reappears then to Mary and to the disciples, and in a sense proving that he has risen. Some of you have seen this painting by Caravaggio, and the person in the middle there, sort of putting his finger into Jesus' wound that he's got from the cross, is Thomas, of course, doubting Thomas. And what this painting shows, and what Christian Gospels suggest, is that Jesus wasn't a ghost. In a sense, he had a body. He had a body with the marks of the crucifixion, and it's a kind of new body that obviously can walk through closed doors and walls and reappear and appear. So it's not quite like our body, but it's similar. He's recognizable to the earthly Jesus. All right. So Christians talk about a resurrected body, not some sort of disembodied soul. And that's why for a long time, of course, Christians were traditionally buried rather than cremated. Okay, so some quotes. I'd like you to have these in your book, just to go alongside the details of the resurrection. One from Gospel of John, written much later, the Gospel about 100 AD. Jesus is saying, "I'm the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will live even though he dies." Sort of an idea that here's resurrection. This is for everybody. Because I've been resurrected, you too will be resurrected. And another quote, this is from Corinthians. This is probably an earlier text from Paul, written probably about 50, 60 AD. And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith. But Christ has indeed been raised from the dead. For as in Adam all died, so in Christ will all be made alive. Okay, so what we've got here is, first of all, in that first line, for Christians, the resurrection of Jesus is significant evidence that he was divine. If he wasn't raised, then our whole faith is useless. The fact that Jesus is risen from the dead, or raised from the dead by God, shows that he was indeed divine. Okay, and the Christianity is based on this. It's a bedrock of Christianity. He is the Son of God. He was the true incarnation of God. And the second line, I think, is just stressing against that idea of atonement and salvation. Through Adam we all sin, original sin, but in Christ we're all made alive. We are given salvation. Okay, and then finally we get to ascension. Sorry, so there's my little picture, Giotto's picture of the ascension. This is a story at the end, after Jesus has been on earth for a number of days. He then ascends to heaven. This is in Mark's Gospel account, and I think also in, was it Luke's? I've forgotten. It was also talked about this in, where is it? Another account as well. I think it's Matthew's version, but it's only in 2 Gospels. Okay, and what is happening here is that Jesus is being restored to God the Father. So we get this idea of the Trinity, I think, here. So this idea of the ascension may have come later and then been written into the Gospels. This idea that Jesus is part of the Trinity. We see these ideas emerging now. Okay, now not all Christians will take this story literally. Some will take it symbolically. But if God has the power to raise Jesus from the dead, surely he has the power also to kind of leave earth and return to heaven. Sorry, it's Mark and Luke's Gospel. There we go. Right. Okay. So I want you just to jot down in your book, what is the ascension? It's this idea of Jesus leaving the disciples for the last time and paving the way, of course, then for the Holy Spirit to come and inspire the disciples, give them energy and give them direction in the Pentecost. And that comes later on. Okay, so what I'd like you to do is, once you've got a few brief notes on those 3 things, crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension, I want you then to answer this exam question, explain 2 ways in which belief in Jesus' resurrection influences Christians today. To help you, there's a link there, but I'm going to put that on the Edmodo. Don't need to send this to me, okay? We're going to pick up on this on next week and see how you got on with that question, okay? Right, that's it. All the best to all of you. It's been good to spend a moment with you. And Mehdi, I love you, brother. All the best, everybody. Bye now.